Dear Patriots Council, as the continued dominance of the Novus Ordo Seclorum consumes Benko Falls, many have lost hope. It seems like we could not catch a break, win a single battle. Jake Clark has committed treason, disgracing the Clark name and everything his older brother sought to build. His betrayal led to a devastating defeat at the Donna, with Commissioner Xavier Klein of Fero being assassinated, along with Eleanor Malco being taken into custody. The hydrologist Toby Winters has disappeared in the aftermath of the fight, but I have no reason to believe he is dead. My sources have confirmed that he is working with the vigilante Bloodshot, an anarchist assassin who had prior ties to the NOS. Without Winters, research on the element wintonium has halted. Miss Volio is doing her best to continue where he left off, but it is clear we need his assistance. Further problems continue in Fero. A special election is being conducted in the aftermath of Klein's death for the position of Commissioner. Heinrich Schneider, who has known connections to Otto Walter's notorious Nazi cult, which existed as a subdivision of the NOS, is running unopposed. Unless a miracle happens, Schneider will take control of the city on June 2. Other suburbs of Benko Falls have suffered similar fates. Edgewater Heights, Northville, Los Posa, Endor. All of them led by puppets of the mysterious Mr. Dominus. In the meantime, only Benko Falls remains out of his grip, but even then, not truly. The police force is controlled by the organization and does not follow my lead. It is only a matter of time they do a formal coup, but until then I wait. I believe they are trying not to provoke attention from the central government, who has had their eye on Benko Falls ever since April 4. Since then, and despite horrifying events such as the BBO attacks, the American government has mostly stayed out of our affairs, at the request of the state of California. If we can get government intervention and support, our council might have a chance to stand up to Dominus and take back our city. But until then, we look backwards. The more we know about the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the more we can do to fight it. Winters found the diary of the late Mayor Thomas Clark. Much of it was written in code, and when it wasn't, it proved to be remarkably vague. Luckily, with the help of some of our greatest codebreakers, such as police like Sam Fuquard and Miles Thomas, under the guidance of Sheriff Porter's investigations, we were able to get translations for much of his journal entries in late 2022. Much of his entries in 2021 are still yet to be translated, along with the ones he has in early 2023, before his ultimate demise. A picture is being painted, and the curtain no longer covers our eyes. What I have read in this entry is shocking. Not just in its depiction of me, but also my family. Everything I once thought was true has been put into question. What follows is 4 journal entries, written around October to December of 2022, telling the story of Clark's high school years at Freedom Miller High from his perspective, and the origin of the problems that we seek to mend to this very day. Yours truly, G. Barrington. Entry 4 to 1977 Part 1 written by Thomas Clark. October 11, 2022. It was a day I remember like no other. October 11, 1977. And as I sit here writing on the 45th anniversary of the occasion, I look back to see how my life has changed. Some for better, mostly for worse. For I was just at the start of my junior year of high school at Freedom Miller. The school was just as much of a hotspot for petty teenage politics and absurd Machiavellian plots that better fitted a Shakespeare play than a center of learning. Many may blame me for the current state of our youth. When they see spoiled brats like Tony Barrington, depressed drug addicts such as my nephew Braden, or the petty schemes of Pierre Dupont's daughter, you may blame the hierarchy I created as mayor, or more rightfully the people I was secretly working with as mayor. But even so, you cannot blame me fully. We replaced a hierarchy, but we did not invent the hierarchy. Back then, the Tony Barrington of Freedom Miller was a senior basketball player named Connor. He was a descendant of Freedom Miller, who along with Elliot Benko founded the city we stand on today. And if you have successfully translated my previous entries, you would know how their story ended in utter disaster, and is still important today to the influence of the long forgotten blues and my family as well. Note from George. I don't know what he is referring to. Is it music? Is it a family? What are the blues? Connor Miller himself was around 7 feet tall, which certainly made him massive and intimidating. He was also a bully and incredibly mean to me, probably related to the Millers' complicated relations with the Clarks. Apparently Freedom Miller always saw my great-grandfather, David Clark, as a weak and pathetic fence rider. At least, I would learn that from Elizabeth, Connor's younger sister. Elizabeth Miller could certainly be considered the 1970s version of someone such as Shannon Porter at Freedom Miller, or perhaps more accurately, Aaliyah DuPont, who attends Benko Falls High School. But that comparison is difficult to make. Elizabeth was more passionate than she was mean. In fact, she tended to be rather nice, unless it was me. But even I could appreciate her beauty. I always had a thing for redheads. Perhaps that's why it was so hard to see where she ended up. There were other students of great importance to this day too. One was obviously Pierre DuPont, the heir to the DuPont Mining Corporation, and another descendant of an important founder of the city. But Pierre was not popular, unlike me, Connor, or Elizabeth. He was considered a geek, and while Connor and Elizabeth never bullied him, most likely out of respect for his last name, others would. Pierre was in the same grade as me, and ever since we met, he would never stop following around like a puppy dog. He was so clingy, and thought I was his best friend. Note from George. Half my job as vice mayor was to deal with Pierre trying to seek attention from Thomas. I don't understand Pierre's problem. It's quite saddening, actually. I don't think he's ever had a friend. He's just been abused. And the DuPont remain friendless into the next generation. This time they're just the abusers. I had known Connor, Elizabeth, and Pierre for many years. The four of us, along with my much younger brother Jake, were the elite of Benko Falls. They were the only ones I took care to take any attention to. But it was two people I would never guess would be the ones to change my life forever. I think I remember exactly what I was thinking about when the big moment happened. It was a passing period. I had just spoken with a girl I liked, but never got to truly pursue. My life had gotten so busy I never had time to marry. In fact, I remain a virgin to this very day. Something Jake endlessly teases me about in private. Note from George. I know this is not important, but Thomas literally lied to me. He said he has been married before. Maybe he was embarrassed, but this was quite shocking, considering I knew him for so long. I think I might Try to lose it before Dominus discovers what I'm planning to do, if he hasn't already. Note. From George. That's big evidence for Winter's claim that Thomas was a student of Dominus. Either way, he knew who he was, and he was planning to work against him. As the passing period continued, I began to think about running in student government. I was a clerk after all, and politics were our forte as much as diamonds were the DuPonts. It was a rite of passage for me to run for president of the student council, just as it later became a rite of passage for me to run for mayor, a position I have been in since the 90s. My thoughts were interrupted by Connor Miller. It was not uncommon for him to pick on new kids. There was this short, stout boy, who seemed to be a freshman. Like the douchebag he was, Connor seemed to be behaving absurdly violently. For the minorest of his offenses. You could have tripped me, shorty bitch. Connor shouted. Please, I'm sorry. I'm new here and trying to find my classes, the boy responded. I rolled my eyes at the unneeded display of cruelty, but would soon watch with my mouth agape as the boy was flung 10 feet across the hallway. Connor would scurry off afterwards with his gang of basketball players laughing like hyenas. What I did next was quite unusual for me. I don't know whether I did it out of kindness, self-gain, or a mixture of the two, but I approached the boy. I reached out my hand and got him off the ground. Thank you, the boy said quietly. Be careful, I said. You don't want to upset Connor. Believe me, I know what it's like. Yeah, that was awful, the boy said. By any chance, do you know where algebra is? Before I could give him directions, I was interrupted by the running of a boy my age down the hall. He was also plump like the boy, and they had similar facial features, with the only difference was this boy was much taller. It soon became clear to me that they were brothers. George, the older brother, yelled. It's our first day here and you already got into a fight. Mom's gonna be pissed. It's not my fault, the younger brother said. He attacked me. Who is this douche? The older brother scowled in anger. This guy needs to be reported. Good luck with that, I said. Connor gets away with everything. The older brother looked in my face and I saw the eyes of the whale I would never forget. George, who is this guy? I don't know. I had been accustomed to admiration and knowledge of my existence, so in my haughty mind, I thought it was quite peculiar. And perhaps even offensive that they didn't know who I am. I blinked. How do you not know who I am? Huh? The older brother asked. Why would we know you are? We're new here. I mean, but I'm pretty important. We're from Montana, the older brother said. Why would we have an idea about who is important in Bencow Falls and who is not? Well, I'm Thomas Clark, I said as I awkwardly extended my hand. A last name's Guy. I see, the older brother said. Well, I'm Jerry Barrington and this is my younger brother George Barrington. Jerry and I shook hands. The first time was tense and awkward, but over the years we would get better at it. I soon found out we shared app chemistry together, and from then on, a friendship would begin to form. But things would get worse. Tom Clark. Note from George. I had little recollection of these events. I don't remember meeting Thomas until months later, after Jerry introduced him to me. Other than that, I generally agree with the depiction of me and my brother. He was always very protective, and to be honest, I was always in need of protection. It's been one of my great life goals to change that fact about myself. Entry 5. 1977 Part 2 written by Thomas Clark, October 31, 2022. In late 1977, Jerry and I had become close friends. He shared my appreciation for complex topics in a way that no else ever could. Evan Groverfield came close, Otto Walter also, until he went mad. And even George came close in his later years, though on much we disagreed. But what made Jerry special was his dedication. He was more ambitious than I was, despite coming from a middle-class family with the ridiculous surname Barrington. Jerry always told me he hated his last name, so it's not surprising he would eventually change it. Jerry was very smart and had dreams of attending an Ivy League school. His grades were always flawless, managing to often get perfect 100s. It was not just from studying, but his raw intelligence played a factor too. He knew how to solve any puzzle, probably because he knew better than anyone how to create one. Our friendship caught the eye of many, most being surprised I, as an old money elite, would ever associate with some new kid from Montana. Most accused me of taking advantage of him, which shows how little the average person respected the moral character of the Clark family. If you read entries 1 to 3, you would understand why this point of view is both justified and unjustified, for different reasons. We would soon catch Connor's attention, who would playfully call us Tom and Jerry. Most of the time, Connor resorted to calling us nerds. Basically, more of the same stupid things you could expect from him. I didn't really care, and I knew Connor would never get physical with me since I held such a high status at Freedom Miller High and Benco Falls at large. Jerry, on the other hand, was more annoyed. Jerry lacked the popularity I had, and he lacked the status. Although he was taller than his younger brother George, he still was only around an average height of 5 feet 9, which was dwarfed by Connor's 7-foot-tall frame. Most significant of all, however, were the romantic aspirations of Jerry Barrington. See, he had a crush. And it wasn't just any girl, it was Connor's younger sister. I don't quite know where and when Jerry and Elizabeth Miller met, but it had to be an elective. Elizabeth was a sophomore, 1 grade younger than Jerry and I. They quickly bonded over shared interests and a chemistry that I see not replicated in any couple I see today. They were obviously friends by December of '77. But the question is, when would things go to the next level? There were many competing answers to that question. But Connor's answer was never. He wanted to see his sister marry someone respectable for their status. Someone like me, for example. Wealthy, Californian, and well settled in the politics of the city. Jerry was smart, but he was just a nobody from a nobody state. He was not rich, nor Californian, nor had any knowledge of politics. But just because he lacked experience does not mean he had no talent. The Burningtons had politics in their blood, but they just didn't know it yet. Both brothers would end up in the realm of politics, whether in a mysterious sect like Jerry, or to be a senator for California and later vice mayor of Benco Falls such as George. Connor did everything in his power to get Jerry away from Elizabeth, and he was not afraid to get physical. Elizabeth knew what was happening, but watched as her brother and Jerry fought over her. She wasn't going to intervene, but instead let fate decide the winner. As the weeks passed, and Jerry's torment continued, eventually something snapped in his mind. Jerry's plan was weird and downright stupid, but in retrospect it was quite genius. He challenged Connor Miller to a one-on-one basketball match. While Connor was Freedom Miller's star basketball player, there was one thing he wasn't: a strategist. Connor confronted his problems with brute force, while Jerry was more clever. If he could beat him, perhaps he could gain his respect, and the bullying that he had endured would come to a stop. It happened the day before Christmas break. The tale on what transpired that day would become one of legend in Freedom Miller High. Jerry shocked everyone and dunked on Connor Miller. When I saw it with my own eyes, I refused to believe it. But now it remains another example of how Jerry is always one step ahead. When Connor most expected him to throw a temper tantrum, but instead, he gave Jerry undying respect. "You're not bad, Jerry. I admit it, you have me beat for a second," Connor said. "Even if it is just this one time. Let me date your sister," Jerry said confidently. "Sure." Jerry raised his eyebrows in confusion. "Really? It's that easy?" "Not many can say they beat a Miller," Connor said. "Especially a Barrington. I'm not happy, but you proved me wrong. And that earns my undying respect." Later that day, Jerry would ask out Elizabeth. She gave him a resounding yes, and they began dating. "At the time, I was happy for my friend. But now, looking back, I realize Jerry Barrington and Elizabeth Miller were a match made in hell." Tom Clark. Note from George. "One of my greatest regrets was never witnessing the basketball game. But Thomas has told me a lot about it over the years. It was actually after that game where I recounted my first memory of formally meeting Thomas, in which he told the fantastic story of my brother's triumph. A few days later, I met Jerry's girlfriend, Elizabeth. By the end of 1977, it was clear that slowly and surely, a new family was integrating itself into the elite of Bencow Falls, the Barringtons. Entry 6 to 1978, written by Thomas Clark, November 22, 2022. With the exception of 1999, 1959, the year I was born, and 2023, the year I will likely die, 1978 was the most important year of my entire life. Everything was changing. We were still all teenagers, but our naivety had dried up. We began to see the world as it truly was, a horrifyingly grim place. The 1970s were not the greatest time for the United States. Watergate had destroyed public trust in the government, the energy crisis was in full swing, and Vietnam had proven disastrous. I was shielded from a lot of the consequences of the pain and suffering, but for the first time in forever, I had a friend who was not. Jerry was not rich, and that impacted my views on the subject. Change became a prerogative of the highest order. Jerry and I were not the only ones who wanted change. Even the elites, such as the Millers, were not happy with the conditions of the world. This is the best scene in Elizabeth Miller. She was a very smart woman, and the only human being I have ever seen that was smarter than Jerry. The two of them would engage in intellectual conversations for hours. For the most part, they agreed change needed to come to Bencow Falls. But what does change mean? A new elite family? Surely not. The disbandment of the elite? That's not what Elizabeth was proposing. Jerry's idea of change was such a radical upheaval of the establishment, it certainly made me uncomfortable. Jerry wanted to reform Bencow Falls under a new ideology. You may ask what ideology Jerry has in mind. But the truth was that he had no idea. Jerry believed he could accumulate knowledge by studying everything. He believed if he became an expert in every field of academia, then he surely must master life. But his perspective was changed by Elizabeth. Life is not a class you can master in college, Elizabeth once said. To think otherwise is the pretense of knowledge. Elizabeth pointed out to Jerry how little we as humans know. I can take 1,000,000 classes, and ace them as well, but to say I'm an expert at life is foolish. Life can only be mastered by living life, not studying life. The occurrences of our lives are way too unpredictable to be formalized. Only through embracing the chaos, may we as humans seek to mend our strife. This was the ideology Jerry would end up adapting. This was the ideology that I believed for most of my life. This is the ideology that destroyed Benko Falls. As 1978 continued, Jerry and I would gain more friends and allies. Most of the time we came to them. Whoever we thought was a good fit for whatever we were creating, we still weren't sure yet. Sometimes they came to us. In Pierre DuPont's case, one day, Jerry and I were walking down the halls, talking about who knows what. It was then when we were confronted by the nerdy Pierre. Tom and Jerry, Pierre said with an ugly smile. How are you guys doing? Great, Pierre, I said. Now if you excuse us. We're trying to. Would you mind if I talk to you two for a second? Pierre asked. Jerry looked at me and sighed, as reluctantly said, sure, but make it quick. Pierre led us to a familiar place. The second floor was certainly a popular destination for the students of Freedom Miller High. The water fountain that operated there as usual had a large line leading up to it. In fact, to this day, as I am writing this during a passing period at school, I believe this remains the case. It's the same reason I have winters working below, and if you successfully translate my later entries, you'll find he serves a greater importance. Note from George. Finding Toby Winters is to be of the most priority. There is a reason the NOS is after him, and there is a reason we are too. In an ounce of wintonium lies a power greater than 1,000 atomic bombs. Pierre gestured to the line of people and smiled. See this, Pierre said. Who knew one water fountain would attract so much attention? The water is colder, I said. Probably plumbing. It's more than just plumbing, Pierre said. There is something special about it. I don't know what, but I have proof. I have letters from 100 years ago. With the help of my dad's mining company, we could become richer than you could possibly. Listen, Pierre, Jerry said. I'm not here to become rich. I'm here to change. And I know all about your family's exploits in mining. I might be new, but my brother worked for your father as an assistant. He said it wasn't exactly the best experience. Note from George. Apologies for my continued annotations. I'll try to make it less of a habit, but I needed to comment on this. I never worked for Antoine DuPont, Pierre's father. I lied to my brother and said I did, because I was out late with this girl from my science class named Olivia. Years later, I would marry her sister. I gave working for the DuPonts for one day as an excuse, and I'm pretty sure Jerry knew it was a lie. But since he never liked Pierre very much, even to when he and his wife died in 1999, though that is put into question by the following entry, he kind of just accepted the excuse and went along with it, using my claims about the DuPonts if it was convenient, though Jerry disliked Pierre DuPont more than DuPont family as a whole, as I heard him say flattering things about the famous founder Benoit DuPont. Long story short, you can never trust a DuPont. Jerry, I always told you to be nice to Pierre, said Elizabeth, who seemingly had popped out of nowhere. The DuPonts had our backs when we needed it. So we should repay the favor. What were you talking about, Pierre? Pierre was flustered. The water and the letters and, so you know too? She asked quietly. Wait, I said, finally, realizing what was happening. Are you talking about the? Jerry was confused. Can you tell me what is going on? I'm still new here. I didn't know there was all this law. Compact. You have a lot to learn, Jerry, Elizabeth said. To be honest, I had a lot to learn too. I was a clerk. But I was clearly not as up to speed on the full story of Bencow Falls as the Millers and DuPonts. I knew a little bit of the story. The full story, which exists in entries 1 to 3, though, was not under my grasp. I knew there was a fight over some water, and I knew Elliot Bencow and Freedom Miller died. That is all I knew. But even the Millers didn't know the full story. So Elizabeth sought out our help in finding the truth. But before she did, she needed to understand if we were ready. There are 27 vows you need to take, she said. And then we can join to discuss what we find. I have written these vows before in entry 2, and I will not repeat them. I apologize, but the depression these vows bring me is too much to bear. But they were life-changing. That number was also life-changing. 27. Over the next couple of months, I, Jerry, Elizabeth, Connor, and Pierre would learn the most tragic tale in history. A tale that would dominate our lives for years to come. Tom Clark. Entry 7 to 1979, written by Thomas Clark. December 25, 2022. We had known the story for months. The story of the founding of Bencow Falls. And understanding the story in detail made me realize 4 realizations about 4 families. The Millers will always claim to be virtuous, despite overwhelming evidence of malice. The DuPonts will always claim to be innocent, despite overwhelming evidence of greed. The Clarks will always claim to be strong, despite overwhelming evidence of cowardice. The Barringtons had no historical baggage, meaning Jerry was the only one I could trust. The 4th realization made my friendship with Jerry turn into a sycophantic loyalty that I am ashamed of to this day. I am not trying to justify my horrible actions that I would soon commit. I'm just trying to explain why I committed them. That's half the reason I'm writing this journal. Anyone can commit evil actions in the right state of mind. Whenever Jerry did commit evil actions that even I couldn't justify, I would always blame Elizabeth. To me, it was always her influencing him to do bad things. It was only until after her death that I would realize that while Elizabeth certainly influenced him, Jerry wasn't doing evil things only because she wanted him to. Jerry was doing evil things because he also wanted to. Whenever I had these delusions, I wish I would have only remembered the most important conversation I had with Jerry. I don't remember the exact day, but it was in March of 1979, a couple of months before high school graduation. The history we had learned was still in our minds, and the desire to change the world was still in our souls. Tom, Jerry said, I know I have told you this before, but I won't look down upon you for the choice your ancestors make. I know, I said passionately. But my family is weak. It's just no wonder they hadn't told me the truth. Just because your family is weak doesn't mean you're weak. Jerry argued. My brother is a wimp, but am I weak? Pierre is annoying, but I won't treat Pierre's future child like I treat Pierre. Your brother Jake is probably gay, but are you gay? Jake's not gay, I said. He has a girlfriend now. That's beside the point. I will never judge anyone because their family was of poorer quality. I will always judge them based on their merit. The key to everything could be found in the blood of long-forgotten enemies. To not realize that would be wasteful. So if you're ashamed of David Clarke's weakness, then stop being weak yourself. I'll try. Look at Pierre, he's not sulking. Jerry said. Look at Elizabeth and Connor. Are they crying over what Freedom Miller did? I laughed. I think they believe Freedom was justified in what he did. On that, you wouldn't be wrong, Jerry said. But Freedom did have a point. Are you mad? Jerry laughed. No. I'm not saying I agree with Freedom Miller on all the betrayal, murder, genocide, and rape. I'm talking about the movement he was starting. Before the war, before the madness. To build a society for a better future. The Novus Ordo Seclorum. You want to bring back the Novus Ordo Seclorum? I asked. Yes. Elizabeth and I have been talking for a while about it, Jerry said as he gently put a hand on my shoulder. And I want you to be my partner. I looked down to the floor. I'm not worthy of that. You're so much greater than me. Jerry sighed. That's not true. We are equals. I am not your master and you are not my student. In the following days, I would meet with Jerry, Elizabeth, and Connor, and we would take the 27 vows once more. Pierre was not allowed to join, on both my and Jerry's request. Although he would soon learn of the existence of a new Novus Ordo Seclorum, and would integrate himself into our activities, he would always remain on the outside, even when his daughter Alia would become an integral member. Much like Pierre, my brother Jake would soon suffer the same fate. He became integrated into the group, but never a fully respected member. Jerry made sure George never even became aware of the group, perhaps out of the brotherly love that still remained in him. On April 4, 1979, the Novus Ordo Seclorum returned, after exactly 103 years of disbandment. In the years that followed, the organization would grow and spiral from what originally was supposed to be about promoting a better world, into conquering it. As I write this entry, and look upon my life, I can only imagine what life would be like if it was different. If I had never agreed to join. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe we even were doing the right thing. But somewhere along the way, we got lost. In a quest to shed my family's infamous cowardice, I became a greater coward than even David. In a quest to change the world for the better, Jerry became a greater monster than even Freedom Miller. And the worst part it is, the world hasn't seen the worst of it yet. Tom Clarke. Final words from George. And so the origin of our enemies is revealed. An origin that has made me question everything. There is still a lot to uncover. Entries 1 to 3, along with entries 8 to 15, are still yet to be translated. As we put together this puzzle, piece by piece, I am forever grateful for your help, Patriots Council. May peace and order reign supreme.